this is another tape. The last one we run right out to the end, and I think that the last that I can remember on that tape was we were talking about the milling machine, and that's more or less some of the idea of some of the things that I did there at Pat Bay. But you know, I think that I've left out the most important, and that was that I told you how we had met Mother in Porge la Prairie, and how we'd been dancing and how we went together and how we bowled and so on. And I said that she said that she thought that I better marry her, but that isn't really the truth. I asked her if she would marry me, and so consequently we were married, and we were married in Winnipeg. I remember the day of the wedding day, going to the barber, and I was so excited about going to be married. I was 21 at the time, and just turned 21. I was 21 on the 23rd of May, and we were married the 1st of June. And going into the barber shop to get my hair cut, and telling the barber how excited I was about getting married, and it didn't seem to fizz on him at all, and I couldn't understand why he wouldn't get up and jump up and down the way I felt like I wanted to get up and jump up and down. But anyway, we traveled to Winnipeg, and we were married by the branch president, I guess he was, wasn't he, Mother?
Yeah.
What was his name?
Roberts.
Oh yeah, Roberts. And he married us, and we had a nice supper afterwards. We were to catch the train. Remember, all Louise's family and all their friends were there, and how enjoyable a meal it was, and how Louise had to rush upstairs to get changed to go on the train. And one of their friends, Mr. Slater, George Slater, he said, "Well, Fred, it's a good thing you don't have to worry about dressing." And of course I was in uniform. I said, "Well, it isn't the dressing that's worrying me, it's the undressing." Of course they all had a big laugh about that. And Art, Louise's brother, drove us to the train, and we had the normal clanking of cans and whatnot behind the car going. We got on the train, and our berth wasn't ready. The porter said, "Well, you can wait in my room while I get your berth made up." And so we did. And Mother had a very large rimmed hat, and she took that off and found to her dismay that it was full of confetti, and as she took it off, it dropped confetti all over the porter's room. And when he came back, Mother apologized for it, and he says, "Oh, don't think nothing of it. I don't blame you. If it wasn't for him, this would have never happened." So he blamed it all on me. And traveling on the train coming through to Calgary, it was dark at night when we got into Calgary, and we stopped and opened the blind on the window, and Mother saw the mountains. For the first time in her life she saw mountains, and she was scared silly. They seemed so imposing to be so large and so black at night. But we had a very lovely trip on the train through to Vancouver, and were met by my parents, and we went and stayed at my parents' place. I remember Mother gathering some, that's Louise, my wife, gathering flowers from the garden and bringing them in to arrange them in a flower pot in the kitchen, and how my dad jumped so quick. My dad was like that, jumped at her to show her how to do it, and I had to tell him that she wasn't used to that sort of thing, and not to jump so fast and quick at it. But they got along real well together. And we went on a trip a boat trip. We went up to Brard Inlet. Oh, what was the name of that place, Mother?
Squamish.
Yeah, we went up to Squamish.
Not Brard Inlet, it was up the north coast, up the coast.
And I think the top of that Brard Inlet was called Indian Head, wasn't it?
Yes, but we went up the coast, we didn't go up Brard Inlet.
Yeah. And well, it was a boat trip. I don't think Mother had been on a boat that large before, and we enjoyed our honeymoon there. And then we had
Lady Cecilia.
the boat we went on. Mother says was called the Lady Cecilia. If she was here, she could tell you what she had for breakfast too.
We had fish.
Says we had fish for breakfast. That's news to me.
That's lunch, I think.
I think we went back to Portage la Prairie from there.
Yeah.
And we spent 6.5 years in Portage la Prairie. That time I was made the branch president.
Forgot that Wes was born and Jim and Myrna.
Oh, no, that's
Oh yeah, right. Sorry.
later.
Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, no, I wasn't made branch president at that time.
No.
We went back to Portage la Prairie, and before long we were transferred to Sea Island in Vancouver. Sea Island is an island in the mouth of the Fraser River, where the airport was at that time. There was both civilian and military. On the north side of the island was the military, and on the south side of the island was the civilian. And we spent 6.5 years there. I flew, as I said before, on Canso aircraft. That's an amphibious flying boat. I was engineer on those.
You mean,
And I was also...
the first time you went to Vancouver, then you went back to Portage, then you went back to Vancouver?
Oh, we just went to Vancouver for our honeymoon.
Oh.
And after our honeymoon, we had to go back to Portage la Prairie.
Right, oh, I see. Oh, that was a nice
And
place
then,
to go for a honeymoon.
Yeah. It wasn't... seemed in Portage la Prairie there was a lot of people being transferred overseas. And I guess I wasn't supposed to go because I wanted to go, but every time there was a draft, I was someplace else. And I just didn't make it. All my friends went over there, Art Edwards, and I can remember as one that went over there to Burma. That was from Vancouver, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. But there was lots of drafts going overseas, and I just seemed to be in a different hangar or on an errand or something at the time. I should add in while I was working in Portage la Prairie that I was in charge of the prop shop.
Oh.
And I did all the setting up of all the propellers, overhauling of all the propellers. The propellers were 6'6" in diameter and weighed over, I think it was 550 pounds they weighed. And
Propellers for what kind of planes?
for the Prairie Battles that was the type of aircraft that we used there. It was a bombing and gunnery school. And the Prairie Battle was a single engine. It was a Rolls-Royce engine. It was 12 cylinders, 6 on each side on a V12, and it was quite an aircraft. I was on crash crew for quite a while too, where we went out and we had a number of crashes, and we had to go out and pick them up and bring them back. Plowed all across Lake Manitoba one time to pick one up. We plowed in half circles because of the weight of the snow. The snow blower or plow would plow, and the weight of the snow would push it in a half circle. And then you'd back up and you'd start at another one and go in a half circle, the weight of it. And we did that all the way across. stayed at a farmer's place overnight and picked the aircraft up and loaded it on the back end of the snow plow with a trailer that we'd taken with us. Loaded it onto that and towed it all the way back across the lake and back to the hangars. But I worked mostly on the propellers, balancing them. They were so finely balanced that you could put a cigarette paper on the tip of on the top blade. We used to do that, put the cigarette paper on the tip of the top blade, and by morning, the weight of that cigarette paper would bring the propeller right around so that it was at the bottom.
What did you stick it to the blade?
Yeah, I just stick it there.
Tape?
Wet it and
Oh.
stick it on.
Should tell them about how you've always told the guys you wanted to live till they went to them.
I'll get to that, I guess.
Well, that's
But
been
on this propeller business, the reason I bring this up was one of the jokes that I had. The guys, torque loading on anything is the pressure it takes to turn it.
Yeah.
And on the blades, it was a 3-bladed prop, the torque loading on the turning of that blade was 40 pounds torque. And it was all accomplished by, what do they call them? Head don't work anymore. A torque wrench. That's what I'm trying to think of. A torque wrench. You put the wrench on the nut and set it at the torque loading that you wanted and pull it. And when it clicked, that was 40 pounds.
Right.
But I went to the guy in stores where he looked after all the tools and all that sort of stuff. And I asked him for 40 pounds of torque. I said, have you got 40 pounds of torque in there? 40 pounds of torque? He said, I've never heard of it. I said, well, I gotta have 40 pounds torque loading on each of the blades of the propellers, and I haven't got any torque. Can you get me 40 pounds of torque? So he looked all over that tool bay, and he looked for weeks. I think it was 3 weeks before we let him in on what
You
was
let him
going
go
on.
for that long?
And finally, well, of course, there was quite a ruckus there after he found out that I was pulling his leg. And it was the same thing when I was in youth training in Vancouver, way back at the start of this business that I'm talking to you about. That we sent a guy out for skyhook, and he looked for a week for a skyhook. And we all used to play silly games like that.
I used to do the same thing in the studio to the young guys, to the new guys. We have a cyc. We have gobos of different lights that we put on the cyc for background, you know, like clouds or something. And I'd be on my camera, my big crane camera, and I'd say, well, I got this cloud coming out of the back of that guy's head. Will you move that cloud? And I'd say, well, the prop man, I said, go over there and pull that cyc over and move that cloud over. He'd walk right across it and he'd pull that cyc over and nothing moved. Because it's the light hitting, you know.
Yeah.
And
Well, we was always
stop halfway through and
pulling jokes on one another.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'd get a big kick out of that. Why they'd think they could move it.
This
It was
fella
the
here,
light hitting it.
this fella here, I met him after the war, about 2 years after the war, or more, downtown in Vancouver. Just happened to meet him on the street. I was walking along Hastings and he was coming towards me. And when we saw one another, he never said, "Hi, Fred." He said, "You and your 40 pounds of torque." That's the first thing he said to me after all those years.
Yeah.
So we had fun there. What else did I do there? Oh, I used to go out. I had an Englishman come in one time with his, and he had something wrong with his prop. He didn't like the way the prop was acting on his aircraft. So we went out and said, Oh, well, I worked it all over and checked out the counterweights and things of that and set it up, and I said, now we'll need an air test on that, and I want a good one. And boy, did he ever give me a good one. We went out to Winnipeg Lake. Is that what it was, Mother? And coming back, there was a creek or a river that wasn't very wide. It wasn't wide enough for the aircraft to go in flat. He had to turn the aircraft up on its side to get in there, and we were that low that to get in between the trees and that, he turned the aircraft up on its side and went ferry battle.
What does that look like?
Oh, I can't tell you. It was a single engine, had a gunner's position in the back, and it had a
Ferry battle.
yeah. It was a single wing, low wing plane, very heavy. I couldn't tell you much else about them. They used to tow it. Used to be gunnery and bombing and gunnery.
A single engine.
Yeah. Bombing and gunnery, and it they would
Wings on the bottom.
well, close to the bottom, not right flat on the bottom,
Oh.
but pretty close to the bottom.
You sit like this.
Ye-
Wheel on the tail.
Yeah, the wheel was on the tail. Yeah.
It was just a straight tail,
Mhm.
not a dual tail.
No, straight tail. And they,
And a two-seater.
well, yeah, they had a pilot in the front and a gunner in the back. That's all.
Where were you in it?
Well, when I went up, I was in the gunner's ship.
Oh,
Gunner's
okay.
position. But he just set it right up on its wing there, and he went down that thing. Boy, was I ever glad when I got on the ground after that. That was some trip that was. Now, where the heck were we?
Lake Winnipeg.
Yeah, when we did that, but when we, well, I just used to work on propellers there, I guess, and then from there we were transferred. Well, Mother and I were married. We were living in Portage la Prairie, and we lived in a little suite upstairs over a home. What was that woman's name?
Patterson.
Yeah, Mrs. Patterson's. We lived there for quite a while, and then we were transferred to Vancouver. And coming out to Vancouver, I've gone over a little bit of this. We got a little bit of ahead of ourselves there, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about Mother and I being married and where we were married and where we lived and things of that sort. And then we were transferred out to Vancouver. Well, I don't know. We lived at different places. We lived at Mosley's first, didn't we?
No, we lived in that. Your dad got a garage fixed up for us.
Oh, yeah, that's right. At my dad's place, there was a garage that had been rebuilt into like a one-room apartment with a little kitchen in the back with a shower and that. It was for, I think, Bob and Edie when they were first married, my
They
sister.
did it.
Hmm?
They did it.
Yeah, Bob and Edie, my second sister and her husband, when they were first married, they rebuilt that and made it, that's where they lived for a time until they were able to build a home, a regular home of their own, next door to Dad's.
Next door.
Yeah, east of Dad's.
You seen that?
Yeah. And
That's something.
we moved in there, and it was at that time that you were born. Wes was born. He was born in a Catholic hospital, wasn't he? Downtown.
St. Paul.
St. Paul's Hospital downtown. We were living in, at that time though, we were living out in
Marple.
Marpole. Yeah.
Where the house burned down.
Yeah, that's right. That little place where we lived. No, Wes was in the crib.
Well, that's right.
Yeah. So we lived in Marpole first,
Yeah.
and then Wes was born, and I had just bought an old '28 Chrysler,
Mm-hmm.
and I hadn't driven very much, and I didn't know very much about the car, and I was scared to stop, and I went all the way from Marpole down to that St. Paul's, through all the traffic lights, red or green, it didn't matter, and that would be, what, 8 miles, Mother?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, about 8 miles from Marpole down to where the hospital was. I just kept right on going.
Why?
Well, I was scared if I stopped the darn car, it'd stall or quit.
Because you were taking me to the hospital.
Yeah, and I was trying to get her there as fast as I could.
Oh, in that Chrysler.
Yeah. And then you were born. And then it was from then that we moved out to Dad's into that little garage. And we'd been there for quite a while. It was the day that Roosevelt died that it caught fire and burned down. And we had such a time because we had bought all the furniture new stove, new bed Chesterfield that pulled
This
out.
is from your wage and being in the Air Force.
Yeah.
You
And
must have been making enough
well, we didn't
to have a car and furniture.
a 28 Chrysler was that would be in what, 42 or
44.
44. So it's
20 years old.
Yeah. 10 would be 38. No, it'd be 12 years old.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Or a little more. 28 to 38 would be 10 years, and 38 to 44 would be 6. So it's 16 years old. Just like the one you bought the other day.
Yeah, it's 15 years old.
Yeah.
That's what I was just thinking.
Yeah. Well, we moved out there, and that well, we had the chimney went out through the side, and we changed it and put it straight up through the roof, and it was a metal chimney, supposed to be insulated, fireproof and all, and it overheated and caught fire to the roof and the attic and burned the whole thing down. Lost everything. And the thing was that we had
Were you home?
when we were buying it. No, Mother was. I was at work. But when we were buying it and paying so much a month, it was insured by the company that Woodward's, that we had bought it from. But
Furniture.
yeah, bought the furniture from, and it cost us so much in interest, and so we thought, well, if we pay it off, we won't have to pay that interest.
Yeah.
So we paid it off, and when we paid it off, then it wasn't insured anymore, and so we lost everything there. And the thing that
Gee, that doesn't seem fair.
no, and the thing that disturbed us was that the people were all talking about how Roosevelt had died, and nobody said anything about our house burning down. That kind of,
Isn't that true?
yeah. Well, we were 6.5 years in Vancouver. Wes was born there, and Jim was born there.
You were born in another house.
Yeah. And we moved from that house and finally got into married quarters out on Vancouver, right on the airport. And Jim and Myrna were both born while we lived there, didn't they? Yeah, they were both born while we lived in married quarters in Sea Island.
We lived in 2 houses.
And young Wes, I think it was young Wes, and maybe young Wes and Jim pulled the fire alarm there once, didn't they? Had the fire engine come roaring over.
That was
And,
Wes.
yeah. I don't know how he lived to be as old as he is now, because I threatened to stand him on his head in a bucket of water often. Anyway, we moved from, transferred from Sea Island, and while I was there, the whole squadron, 122 was the name of the squadron. I was working as a machinist, and because of that, I was separate. As a matter of fact, at the time that they were transferred to Burma, I was across the field in a hangar, a civilian hangar, working on a lathe. I was running a lathe over there, and I just went back and forth to work to there, and I never did see the squadron, but they pulled out the whole squadron and went to Burma and left me behind.
Then I had that dream, I don't know, it was you or me, I think it was me. This boxcar, flying boxcar took off, and it had a rope tied to the, you know, how the tail is, to this one and to that one, and I was hanging on to it. And I don't know if I was, I just remember, oh, you were flying it, and you were leaving me. You were taking off again or something, and I hung onto this rope, and we took off into the air, and I was flying around hanging onto this rope. Sure, and it just...
You remember being on the expediter out there? You went for a ride in an expediter.
Yeah, through the mountains.
And out over the water, and the guy turned the thing right on its wingtip, right up on its wingtip.
Yeah.
But we...
That was like, that was really flying, you know.
We were transferred from there to Claresholm, Alberta, and that was about what, 51?
Yeah.
1951. We were transferred from Vancouver to open up Claresholm. And I was a...
What do you mean open up?
Well, the station had been closed, well, the end of the war came actually
45.
in 1945 while we were in Vancouver. And we did a little bit of, well, 6 years there. We were flying cansos and just more for patrols, things of that sort. And training. We did an awful lot of training on cansos, training pilots to land on water.
Mm-hmm.
Let me tell you, that's an experience when you're sitting up there as the engineer, and they try to land, and they land 15 feet off the water, and crunch, and you bounce, and
That's hard on a plane too.
plane and everybody. They sure used to have some awful landings. But that's what the training was for, to train them to land flying boats on the water.
Yeah.
I think from there then, as I said, we were transferred to Claresholm in 1951 to reopen that station for training of pilots. We had Harvards for training, and they're a little two-seated yellow aircraft with a radial engine.
Oh, I know that.
8-cylinder. But some of these people that are viewing this 100 years from now may not know what a Harvard was.
Yeah.
I did the inspection for the first aircraft that come in. They call it an acceptance check.
Yeah.
And I worked on the first aircraft that came in. I was a corporal at the time, and I remember cleaning up the station. They used to get crews of men. Well, we'd go on parade in the morning, and we'd have roll call and so on, and then they would go along and say, okay, from here to the right, you go with so-and-so, and here to the right, you go with so-and-so, and here to the right, you go with Corporal Hillyer. And we were told ahead of time, of course, where we were going and what area we had to do. So on this one morning, I had a group probably of 15 or 20 men, marched them out to where we were supposed to clean up paper and rake it and all the rest of it. And when we got there, it had already been done. There was nothing for them to do. And we sat there for a while, and there was trucks going down, getting gravel down at the gravel pits. And they were going by, about every 5 or 10 minutes there'd be a truck go by. So I said to these guys, if I was to look over here, how many of you guys would be left when I look back? And of course, I looked away in a few minutes, and I turned back, and there wasn't a soul in sight. They'd all hopped on these gravel trucks as they were going by and went down to the gravel pits and went swimming. And never did see them again that day. We had lots of fun. Well, let's see, what happened while we were in Claresholm, Mother? Well, in Claresholm, that's where Dawn was born, wasn't it?
We went to Abbotsford for a while to close up the station. That's where Jim said his little piece.
Oh, that's before we went to Claresholm.
Yeah.
Now, I've left out a segment, Mother tells me.
Well, from Vancouver to
Yeah, just
Claresholm.
before we got to Claresholm, before we left to go to Claresholm, we were put out to Abbotsford, which was another Air Force base close to Vancouver, probably 20 miles or so driving, and we were to close the station. We lived in the police barracks and jailhouse. Lived in the cells.
In Abbotsford?
Yep. We lived there.
Oh, I don't remember.
You kids slept in one cell and Mother and I slept in another cell. And I remember one day Jim came running in and we were sitting around a pot fire there and
How long did we live there?
He was 2 years old.
yeah,
10 days.
10
Oh.
days.
That's all we lived there.
Well, no.
He was 2 years and
Yeah.
just about a half.
And little Jim came running in. He was about 2.5 years old, and he climbed up on a chair and got a book in front of him, and he was sitting there with the book upside down and looking at it. And finally, he threw the book down and he ran over and to Mother, and he said, "Mother, I can't read." You'll never forget that. Remember another time out in Vancouver, he'd wet his pants and
Yeah.
we were scolding him about it, and he said that he didn't wet them, that he was standing on his head and it was raining. That's how they got wet. He's quite an imagination, that guy. So then I guess we could go from there to Claresholm. We've been there twice now, haven't we?
Yeah.
I told you about how I did the acceptance check on the first aircraft that came in, and how we were cleaning up the place and how the men went swimming. And I think after everything settled in, I got my third stripe. I was sergeant. And
Yes, every day.
I was in the flights in charge of a crew that serviced the aircraft as they came back from their training flights. And one of the things that sticks in my head was that on the Harvard there's a little panel just back of the propeller where you plugged in the auxiliary power for starting the engine.
Mm-hmm.
There was a battery cart like, brought it up, and this had a Zeus fastener that you put a screwdriver in and turned a half a turn, it would undo it and the flap would come up, and the flap was pulled forward, so you had trouble after you were trying to get it out with the slipstream blowing it closed.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the winter you had big mitts on and you're trying to get a screwdriver into this little slot to do up this Zeus fastener. And so I put in an unsatisfactory condition report to the engineering officer and suggested that we put a winged Zeus fastener on there so that you can get a hold of it with your thumb
Oh,
and
yeah.
finger and turn it. You didn't have to fool around trying to get a screwdriver into it. And his reply was that it would be unsatisfactory because it would cause turbulences, air turbulences down the side of the aircraft. And So I
doubt it.
So yeah. So I suggested then maybe if we put it in line, so that when it was locked, it was in line, then there wouldn't be that turbulence there.
Yeah.
But he didn't like me,
Right.
and
It's not his
so
idea.
so that's as far as it ever got. But I took him down in maintenance hangar one day and showed him. Let's see, if we turn this Zeus fastener, have it set so that when it's locked, it would be in the inline position. There would be no eddying down the side of the aircraft.
What's wrong?
To turn this on. Shut that off in there.
Do you have to do that right now?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so
Yeah, well,
the
we'll
reason.
take a break for,
Yeah. Okay, just say that.
yeah, I did.
Oh, say it again.
Well, we'll just take a break here for a minute now, and we might have supper and then come back to this after.
Oh.
Well, it don't matter what you think about that, because we took a break and we had supper, and this is the next day, and it's 10 after 4, the next day.
And I've been to Lethbridge and back, and
Yeah.
you had a good sleep.
Wes has gone into Lethbridge and back, and I had a good night's sleep, and so we'll go at it again here. One thing we forgot to mention about Vancouver was that we met Howard and Grace Lane there in 1944, and they've been our friends ever since. That's a good many years. And in Clara's home, we met Aberd and Elizabeth Toon. They were our neighbors. Remember, Aberd got sick one time, pretty sick. He was in bed for a week or more, and I went and milked his cows. I think that when they knew that I was milking them, they gave sour milk for that time. Don, our youngest boy, was born in Clara's home. Another thing we did in Clara's home was help to build a new chapel. There was President Wood came up to dedicate that chapel, and that's about the only time I ever met him or saw him, actually. I think it was a few years after that he died, and so I never did see him again. On our transfer from Vancouver to Clara's home, we came to the temple in Cardston, and we were sealed as a family. Mother and I were married for time and eternity, and we were sealed as a family on the 11th of July, 1951. Of course, that would be Wes and Jim and Myrna. And then, of course, with the others, Don and Paula, they were born under the new and everlasting covenant, so we didn't have to have them sealed to us in
You
the
should look
temple.
in the lens. Every once in a while,
Yeah.
you can look over at me or wherever.
We were stationed at Clara's home from 51 to 53, and then we were transferred from there to Portage Prairie. That was right back home for Louise. It was 2.5 years actually in Portage Prairie. It was in
Clara's home.
or Clara's home, I beg your pardon. 2.5 years in Clara's home, and then we were transferred to Portage Prairie. It was in Portage Prairie that Paula was born, and that was quite a traumatic, is that the word, Mother?
Yeah.
Occasion. She was born 2 months premature. I forget what she weighed.
3 pounds,
Three-
8 ounces.
3 pounds 8 ounces she weighed. But before she was born, the doctor came to me and said that that my wife may not live, and the baby wouldn't live for sure because it was 2 months premature and it was breached. And we told him that we believed in administering to the sick in our church, and would it be all right if we did administer to Mother. So Howard Lane and I were administered to Mother. She had, what's the name of that toxemia? Was it, Mother?
What?
What was the name of that poison you had in you?
Oh, toxemia.
Toxemia, yeah. and she was in labor, and we administered to her, and she quit labor, and I think you came home for a day or two, didn't you?
Yeah, I came home.
Yeah, came home for a day or two, and all that poison that was in her body left her. And then as she went back into labor, we took her back to the hospital, and Howard and I administered to her again and asked that the baby might be born normal. And that was the time that the doctor told me that the baby wouldn't live, that my wife would be fine, but the baby wouldn't live because it was breached and it was 2 months premature. And the baby turned in the womb and was born normal. And the doctor called her the miracle baby. We named her after that doctor. Now her name is Paula Regine, and Regine is after the doctor. Paula Regine Grace. Regine is after the doctor. His name was Reginald, and the mother said to him, it's too bad it wasn't a boy, so we could name her after you. And he said, well, you can. My name is Reginald, and my wife's name is Regina. You could call her Regina. So we called her Regine, and Grace is after her grandmother on my side. My mother's name was Jane Grace Hillyer. And in Portage-la-Prairie, I worked on what we called the T-33 aircraft. It was a training jet. They come off of Harvard's and went on to T-33s, or this training jet. The American version of it was called a Silver Star, but we called them T-33s. And I started out in the flights, as I think I said before. No, that was in Claresholm that I was telling you about, being in charge of a crew on the flights, and I was the same thing in Portage-la-Prairie, working on the flights, and had a crew of men and that serviced the aircraft as they came back in. And then I was transferred to I was transferred to instructing on the engines. It was a Neem 10 engine, which was a centrifugal type compressor, and at one time I knew all the temperatures of the gases as they went through the engine, and I knew all the speeds, and I knew all about the divergent ducts and convergent ducts and all the rest of it that make a jet engine operate. I suppose when you people view this, a jet engine will be, well, meaningless to you because, well, that's about all we have nowadays is jet engines. But when I was instructing on these, they were it was a new conception of an engine. And I instructed NATO students from all over the world, French and Norwegian and German and, well, you name it, we had them. Italian, we had all of them. I remember one time giving a lesson on the clearances on the turbine on the engine, that they were 60 thou on the top and 40 thou on the side and 20 thou on the bottom. And this Norwegian class that I was teaching, one of them put up his hand and said, "What do you mean this thou?" So I wrote out on the blackboard as long as I could, and as big as I could, 1,000. And I said, over here in Canada we're lazy, so we leave off the sand. And so I rubbed off the sand, that left Thou, thou. And he said, "Oh, you mean Tusen?" I said, "Yeah, 60 Tusen on the top, 40 Tusen on the side, and 20 Tusen on the bottom." Well, that was one of the experiences in instructing at that time. In moving to maintenance, I was placed in charge from this instructional school. I instructed there for, I think a year and a half or 2 years. I think 2 years. How long were we in Portage? 6.5 years?
Yeah.
Yeah, we were in 6, so I think it was 3 years that I instructed on the engines. And then because I was getting to a point that I would be looking out the window, watching people going by and instructing on the engine at the same time and wondering if I'd said what I should say. I'd turn back from the window and wonder, well, what did I say? I wonder, what did I cover? So I went to them and told them I've had enough of this, 3 years, same thing over and over. So they transferred me to maintenance hangar and put me in charge of the engine bay, where we dismantled the engines and rebuilt them, put in new flame tubes and anything that was needed as it was worn. We would rebuild the engines. I had a crew of, I think, 6 or 8, 10 men I think I had. Had fun there because I was the only, had the only telephone that was available to the men that were on the maintenance floor. So they used to come and use my phone. I had a little wicket in the wall, and the telephone sat there, and they would come and use it, and they would ask me for the numbers that they wanted. And I'd give them, they called me the walking telephone directory because I knew all the telephone numbers on the base, and they would just ask me, I want to phone 3 hangar, what's the number, and so-and-so. You know? And so, but every now and then I'd throw in, I'd give them the Padre's number, and they'd phone the Padre, and the Padre'd come on the phone, this is Padre so-and-so, and they'd hang up, and then they'd...
Here's a bad boy.
They'd ball me out for giving them the wrong number. But I was on that job for quite a while, and with that I went on all the air tests. Every air test that went out of maintenance hangar, I had to go with it. There was another fellow, Johnson was his name. He and I shared all these air tests that went out of maintenance hangar, and that was quite an experience too. One time well, the reason that we went was that there was a vibration set up in the aircraft. Sometimes it was engine, and sometimes it was airframe, and so we went to determine if they got this vibration, whether it was airframe or air engine. The pilots themselves couldn't distinguish between it. On the engine, it was caused by the main fuel valve. And if that main fuel valve wasn't set just right, it would let too much fuel through or not quite enough fuel through. Mostly it would let too much fuel through, and there would be a rumbling in the engine, and it would cause vibration. The other was that on the wings of the T-33, there was a fault of some sort that would cause vibration, and they used to have to put spoilers along the leading edge of the wing so that the airflow over the wing was altered, and it would get rid of this vibration. So that's what we did mostly, tearing down these engines, rebuilding them, and doing test runs on them, and doing air tests on them. One time on an air test, we had completed all our air tests. They used to do spins. They'd do a spin to the left and a spin to the right, just to check out the characteristics of the aircraft. Mm-hmm. And it was a terrible aircraft to spin because it was designed that it wouldn't spin, and so you had to make it spin. So you put the nose down, and it would go around once, and the nose would come up. So you were going around, and then you'd come up, and then you'd go down and around, and your nose would come up. And it was like riding a buck and bronco on darn thing. So I got to a point where they'd say, well, we're
forcing it.
Yeah.
To do that.
Yeah. We'd have to do, he'd say, well, I'm going to do a spin to the left. And I'd say, you see that cloud over there? Just let me out over there, and I'll wait for you. Well, this one air test we were on, we had finished all our test, and we're just cruising along, and he called back to me in the back seat, said, is there anybody on our tail? And so I loosened off my harness and leaned forward and looked out the back, and I said, yeah, there's some joker sitting out back there. He said, well, we'll show him. And did we ever have the doggondest dog fight you ever saw? He pulled 6G in the front seat, which gave 8G in the back seat, and I just went right out cold. You know, many times before, when they pulled maybe 4 or 5G in the front, then I would be at 6G in the back, and I would kind of gray out. The blood from your head comes down, and first of all you get a red out because you're looking through the blood in your eyes, and then everything kind of goes gray, and then in that second or two the aircraft has come out of this turn, and so that G-force that's been pushing you down is gone. But on this one, I went right out completely, and when I came to, I saw the panel, the instrument panel, and I thought, oh yeah, I'm flying. And then I saw the banana handle where that would be what you pull if you were going to eject. And then saw the stick, and then I realized that I was flying. Of course, I was only out for probably a split second, or maybe a second or two. That's all.
Really?
Oh yeah, I mean, a turn like that, you know, what we were doing.
But you still get disorientated.
Oh yeah, I'm right out. I didn't know where I was. Yeah, just for a split second, you know.
It's funny that you forget all that in this 1 second.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's just like being knocked out and coming to.
Yeah,
You know,
it's irrelevant.
you're knocked
how
out,
long.
you just shake your head and what happened, sort of thing, you know. And
Yeah,
that's
you
what-
could have been out for 10 minutes
No, only, oh, and you mean when you're knocked out?
if you're not.
Yeah, yeah, but in the turn, you're only out for a few seconds because what we
Oh,
were
yeah.
doing, we were flying straight ahead like this, and he was right on our tail, right behind us here, so we just flipped over like this. Made a turn like that. Well, on that quick turn, we were going so fast that it applied 8G to me on the back end. And that's what forced everything out of, all the blood out of my brain, and so it just
Yeah.
quit functioning for a split second or so. Another one that they used to do was what they call that?
Roll.
Yeah,
Rhubarb.
rhubarb roll. He would turn into a turn this way, and he'd be turning, going this way, and then he'd flip over, and he'd be going that way. So you're going this way, and then you're going that way. Yeah,
Yeah.
when you're on a turn, you're banked up on this way, going on a turn this way, and then you just flip the thing over, and then you'd be going that way. Rhubarb roll. Boy. Then other thing we used to do was take us. Well, I used to love it when we were on an air test, and there'd be cumulus clouds, the thunder clouds building up,
Oh, I know.
and we'd go fly towards those, and we'd
Tell
climb
me
up
about
them
that.
like this, and then we'd turn over and just go over the top of those, and boy, you could realize the speed that you were going. We were
Yeah.
going at probably 350 knots or something like that. Another thing they let me do, because I flew so much, they would let me take control, and I would do loops and rolls. And to do a loop, he would say, put your nose down, and so I'd be going down, and then until your speed got up to 300 knots, and then pull back on the stick, and you'd climb right up like this, and you just over the top and come back. Now what we used to do is line up on a section line, so we get a straight line. But I always come out half a mile out, and he said it was because when I was going over the top, I had moved the rudder. Just automatically moved the rudder, and I'd come out half a mile out every time. And the same on the rolls. That I used to love to do rolls because it was the same thing. You put your nose down at 300 knots, pull your nose up, and then you just whip the stick over to one side, and you'd go up like this, rolling. Gee, I like that.
Ooh.
That was lots of fun. One time they let me sit in the front seat as a student and take off and land. I got 1 takeoff and 5 landings. Yeah, well, I come down and I hit so hard that I bounced 5 times. Then he took over and pushed the throttle forward and took off and come around and landed in the shop.
Scared the heck out of him.
Well, they used to have that quite often with the students, on their first landing. They
Yeah.
hit pretty hard and they'd bounce. That's what he was there for, I guess, to instruct them on. And I don't know why he wouldn't say, though, you're coming in a little too hot and
Yeah.
pull back on your throttle. But Anyway, we come in, boom, and I bounced 5 times, and then he pushed the throttle forward and took off at the end of the runway. That's about all my experience in the flying end of it. Oh, I was in a decompression chamber where we used to take pilots up to show them the effects of being without oxygen. They used to take us to about 35 or 40,000 feet in this decompression chamber. And then I was always the guinea pig to take my mask off, and I'd write my name. And the first time I wrote it, it was fine. And the second time it was a little bit scrawly, and the third time it was scrawled all over everywhere and probably didn't get finished, and I'd pass out. And they'd slap the oxygen back on me and I'd come to. And this was to show them that when the effects of being without oxygen, you feel that you're fine. You don't know that you're without oxygen until all of a sudden you pass out.
Wasn't it Portage that you went on the course for the flight engineer?
Where?
From Portage to Prairie?
Yeah. I transferred from that. But I was on that compression chamber business for quite a while too. Remember when we took up some...
I don't think we got you coming out of Vancouver and joining the Air Force.
Yeah, I did. Oh, yeah. Told about marching down Hastings Street.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
So the decompression chamber,
Yeah. One time we took some...
that's kind of dangerous.
No. We did do explosive, like if you were to eject your canopy at a high altitude, what it would be like. And what we used to do was put a piece of paper, newspaper it seemed to be, between one section of the decompression chamber and the other. And then we'd poke a pen through it, and it just poof, blow all that out, and the pressure would drop so fast. It'd give you that experience of the pressure dropping so fast, and it did seem to me there was always a kind of a mist, a cloud that came. I suppose it was from the moisture in the other room where it exploded into, being hit with that pressure all of a sudden. Then from there I should tell you that while I was there, I was made the branch president of the branch of the church there.
Was Howard the first counselor?
No, Cal Hill was my first counselor, and Howard Lane was my second counselor. And we wanted to raise money for a building, and I asked the commanding officer. Went right into his office. I was shaking like a leaf, asking him if we could use part of the airport to grow flax on. And he said, well, I'll have to think about that and see about that. I'll let you know later. So about a week later, here he comes driving up the tarmac and stops in front of the hangar and comes in. Said, Hillyer, come on with me. So I went out and got in his car with him, and we drove out on the taxi strip that taxied out to the main runways. And he said, see this piece of land here, on this side here? There's a good, probably 30 acres there, and you can plow it up and use it for what you want. So we plowed up 10 acres of ground there and planted flax, and we had a blessing on the crop. The whole branch came out, and we all asked our Heavenly Father if He would protect the crop, and it was protected. We had a big cyclone go through there. It tore off roofs and lifted, bounced aircraft around, and it tore parts of the roof off the hangar, and downtown there was houses that had the roofs torn off and trees that were blown down, and it was a terrible storm. But when it came to our flax field, it parted, and part went that way, and part went that way, and just left our flax field sitting right there.
Yeah.
Never touched our flax field. And we were, because we were,
I remember when we went out there to look at it, we could see all around where it's all flat and ours was standing up.
yeah, it was a marvelous thing.
But I don't remember it being that close to the runway.
Well, I don't know whether I should start there. I was thinking maybe I should go back and start at the first, like
Yeah.
where I joined the forces.
Yeah.
Well, you see, I went to youth training first.
Youth training.
Youth training
How
is
old
what
were
they
you?
call it. And we went to a university. Well, it would be a college, I guess, in Vancouver.
Yeah.
And they took, it would be like classes. It would be a group. I don't know how many would be in the group. But we went there to learn about mechanics, to learn the four-stroke principle and the two-stroke
Gasoline,
principle. See that, and they would drill us on that. That was
How old were you?
well, I was. Let's see. I think I was 17 because when I joined the forces, I was 18, and I had about a year of